Hey there, and thanks for tuning in. This is the Resonant Identity Podcast, where we explore ways to help you achieve transformation and flourishing in line with identity-aligned living and coherence. I'm your host, Terrence Waters, CEO and founder of Fluxline Resonance Group and creator of the Resonance Core framework from which this podcast and its episodes are built from. If this work resonates with you, I invite you to go ahead and follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, Spreaker, or wherever you get your podcasts. And just a quick note before we begin, AI was used to help me generate this episode, and every part of it was reviewed and verified by me and Fluxline before publication. And while I definitely am a human and I'm directly speaking to you in this podcast, the content we actually write and share was generated using AI. At Fluxline, we advocate for responsible, transparent AI usage and take full accountability for the content that we share here and across our platforms. To learn more, visit fluxline.pro/legal. That's FLUXLINE.pro/legal. For this topic today, we will be discussing episode 3, Inner Alignment, which talks about how to understand identity-aligned work that actually goes within ourselves, aligned with the somatic, the body, and also the emotional and narrative side of understanding inner alignment. So really, what does inner alignment actually mean, right? When we think about inner alignment, this actually refers to how our systems ourselves align with what it is that we truly want to become. And that is in line with the identity of what we choose to be, who we have been, and also who we are becoming, in line with who we actually choose we want to be. Inner alignment is not just simply believing or understanding that we are aligned or that we're making decisions based on what we think actually makes sense in terms of what we believe our identity to be. It actually comes from our biological systems, not just simply our means of thinking. As I talk about in the Resonance Core framework, I really do discuss the means of understanding that inner alignment really more talks about how the body responds to many different circumstances and situations. When we, for example, are being threatened or experience issues that may go against how we view the world, we instantly feel in our bodies and in our minds that process of really wondering what actually it means to be aligned and also feel defensiveness in result to it. Sometimes we may be experiencing something where we all of a sudden experience truth, but for whatever reason, it goes completely against our worldview. And because of that, we then have this disconnect trying to understand how do we reconcile with what we know in that moment versus what we actually have experienced in truth. Now, I experienced this actually today where I was experiencing understanding of really what it actually means to truly be aligned. And that included understanding what I'm going to be doing as a podcaster, and then also what I'm going to be doing as a worker, right? Because my future self truly understands myself to be someone more visionary, a scholar, an academia person, a person who really does want to show people the importance of resonance. But my past identity has always really understood myself more to be a person of the corporate life, the traditional ways of actually going and understanding a job security, working with people, understanding how to create new and exciting systems, but at the same time being held back by the rigidity that is corporate life, which is why I'm actually doing this now, which is now understanding how I want to really be able to discuss and bring together how I'm going to be able to work with other people in showing them what identity alignment really truly means. This is a perfect example where I noticed this actually with this podcast in a beginning step. I had started using AI and kind of its frameworks to start to create episodes, which was pretty easy, and I was getting information from my first two. But what I was noticing was that there was this disconnect happening. Yes, I was definitely talking about topics I wanted to express. Yes, I was the one who was approving a lot of the different means and also the documentation and the scripts and what the AI was actually saying. But when I listened to the episodes at the very end, we're not really realizing what I was publishing, I realized that they really weren't me. I didn't have that ability to really be able to discuss what I really wanted to get through to people. It really didn't have that sense of voice. And while AI definitely helps with a lot of things, what I'm learning is in podcasting, that's really not the truth. I really needed to be able to actually speak to people in a voice that truly sounds like me. And so this third episode definitely is my own voice. It's my own understanding of what I believe the resonance core framework to be, inner alignment, and so on. And that's where I realized I needed to start recording my episodes from scratch. So here I am. This is kind of my new way of trying to understand what I really want to bring out to the world, having people understand who I am, also allowing people to resonate with what it is I want to say. And I felt that this was the best way to do that. So when I was trying to understand myself, what does that alignment look like? I was experiencing some issues where I already know that I am this aligned person, that I want to be a visionary, a scholar, an academia person, a person who creates intelligent property, right? IP related work. But my emotions and my nervous system have really had a hard time trying to actually identify with that. And today, I was experiencing such drainness in terms of understanding my emotional side. And my nervous system really was on all fire, not really understanding what it is that I'm trying to do, especially as I'm starting to look at the externalities of what is happening with myself, right? I have been having trouble with what am I going to do for my financial future? What am I going to do to be able to secure income, my PhD? Things that I'm actually working on now that do resonate with what it is I'm trying to become. But my past experience is really throwing about all of these different somatic cues and emotions based on my past experience. And this is what we call inner alignment, which is understanding that you may be aligned in some areas of your life in terms of your narratives, your cues, your emotional cues, how your body feels, and so on. But the problem is usually a lot of that shows misalignment because of our past experience of what it is that we know. And I call this specifically what's called the vast unknown of our brain. Our brain has this vast process data center of understanding that the things that we have done in our past, things that we have experienced in our past, and its recollection of who it thinks we truly are based on those past experiences. And this is usually the source of friction that we experience in our own biological systems, both somatic, emotional, and also narrative. Usually our narratives tend to fall back from this vast unknown, especially when we are in a storage of threat. And because of that, it tends to pull from that data center of past experience to help us deal with the threat or the excitement or whenever the nervous system feels like it needs its system. And so what happens here is that because of that, we start to experience this distorted view of reality, this understanding from a somatic memory circumstance where our body naturally responds to stimuli and our brain responds in terms of those times where it feels unsafe, threatened, even excited. And what it does is it then pulls from that vast unknown of our body and our mind and tries to give us a frame of reference to being able to deal with the threat or the energy that our nervous system actioned us toward. And that's the hard part, is that our nervous system and our mind are hardwired to respond to those threats and things in order for us to be able to achieve a standard point of homeostasis, because we want to get rid of that threat as quickly as possible. We want to find the ways to being able to achieve calm, because when we are energized in that way, when our nervous systems respond to this stimuli that it finds threatening or excitable, our brain then fires into action, grabbing all of those things from our past experiences, trying to help us fight off what's currently happening. And most of the time, because of how our brain has understood our past, most of the time this is put through a thing which is called distortion. Our brain doesn't have a very good process of being able to understand and recollect or recall past experience. This happens because we have a certain idea of what we think the world is and what it is that we have experienced. And many times those are shrouded in distorted ways of thinking, which unfortunately are from our past and are not usually relative to our present. We'll talk about this more as we start understanding some additional episodes, like the mind lies to us and how the body keeps the score because of its responses. But the fact of the matter is, everyone has a version of this. We all experience this as a natural process whenever we really try to understand who we are and how that we can actually deal with the threats and the situations that we experience because of that past and what it is that we've done in our past. And so this is what the nervous system tends to do through what's called the threat response cycle, which is understanding an activation stance when it feels we really need to be able to work through something. Whether that is excitement, it could be stress, it could be threat, defensiveness, offensiveness, many different things. And as a result, our mind then goes through a process of what's called overwhelm, which I know many of us have experienced this. This can manifest in many different ways. This could be overthinking of what to do in a situation. This could be withdrawal because we simply do not want to acknowledge the pain that we're currently experiencing. This could result in other things, such as threat response, such as anger, frustration. When we experience circumstances that go against how we view the world. And that becomes an issue when we're really not sure specifically how to actually handle the issue. What I'll also leave you through before we go to break is that alignment really is not a mindset. It's a constant process of trying to find the best way that we can to being able to align with who we are and who we want to become. And that process is a lifelong process because many times when we are in this threat response cycle, like I just mentioned, our body is in misalignment because it is trying to protect us using a past version of what it thinks we are, rather than who we are and who we want to become. And so those moments of friction where we know we need to do something, but our mind and our body are trying to protect us from it, that's where that misalignment occurs. And it is our duty as identity stewards in the resonant identity to understand when those friction points occur and find the best way what we can do when we experience those emotions, those cues, and those thoughts to realign them in the present moment and in who we want to become so we can transform into that person. And we're back. Thanks for joining me. In this next section, I want to talk about the nervous system cycle, or as I like to prefer to call it, the threat response cycle. This is a natural process where our nervous system goes in and again responds to stimuli or situations that we encounter to activate our bodies in order to be able to deal with the perceived or real threat or excitable circumstance, depending on what the nervous system feels like we need to do. So what it does is when the nervous system begins to understand that it needs us to activate in some way, it does through what's called an activation cycle. And this can be a response to anything internal or external to us, depending on what the nervous system actually understands. It does this at 1,000,000 miles an hour with 1,000,000 different cycles, most of the time where we are completely unaware of what our nervous system is doing. And usually we don't actually understand what it's doing or the responses it's put through until we come consciously aware of it, which most of the time happens well after the nervous system and our mind have totally gone through and excited all of the different systems and organs and things that it needs in order for us to be able to deal with those perceived threats. And it does this through a specific cycle, which starts with the activation cycle, which fires off those neurons directly to our brains and any impacted specific organs so that it will then begin to help us, as it so tries to do, to help us work through and resolve the threat or the excitability that it's experiencing. As a result, it goes directly to our mind in very specific areas, which then works through firing its own signals in response to the threat or excitement. And eventually, if we do not deal with the situation correctly, or if we're simply just not aware that our nervous system and our brain are doing anything, we then experience the next step of the nervous system cycle or the threat response cycle, which is called the overwhelmed state. Like I mentioned before, this is where we experience the issues of anxiety, where we experience trouble actually breathing, we feel our chest tightening, our heart rate then becomes elevated, and we have a hard time being able to truly understand what is happening around us. And at a certain point, we then try to work through what we need to do, whether that be however we deal with the circumstance, which hopefully that results in a decision that really does help us in order to being able to make and deal with the threat. Or sometimes it also means that because we cannot deal with it, we then do some other things which may or may not be profitable, such as going through and trying to quash the actual experience. Sometimes we look toward other means and ignore it or distract ourselves from it, or try to do things that may or may not actually help us in terms of what it is the nervous system is trying to get us to pay attention to. Whatever the case may be, whether we properly deal with the situation through a response or react to it, whether that be by distorting our process, whether that be us working through and just stopping it dead in its tracks, that then causes what's called the release cycle, where the nervous system detects that the issue is over and no longer needs the body or the brain to really deal with all of the different systems that it's trying to work through. And so it sends signals, basically by stopping its signals, through the parasympathetic nervous system, which then signals to our normal state that everything has calmed down, and then therefore we do not need to be in this heightened state of awareness any longer. The tricky part here is that we need to remember this happens instantaneously, oftentimes when we are not aware that anything has happened in our nervous system. But the important thing to remember is that it is always the body which starts everything. It's always the piece that is constantly looking for those frame of references and trying to alert us to when we actually need to action on something. It is always starting in the body, not the brain. A lot of people think it might be an actual thought, but the fact is this is the nervous system detecting something that it poses itself as a threat, and needs us in order to be able to thwart it off, right? And so the reason we mention this is our next section, which is for how alignment changes our choices, right? Alignment changes those choices because we then are able to take our nervous system's firing mechanisms and help calm it down so that way when we do experience those moments, which may be uneventful or a problem or something that we experience that is uncomfortable or sometimes just a problem, instead of giving into that reactionary process of trying to respond in a negative or emotional way, whether that be yelling, screaming, distortion, defensiveness, what have you, instead, identity alignment more looks toward the process of how we can properly look at those cues and instead ground ourselves in the current situation and moment to truly understand what actually is happening. We'll discuss this a little bit more about regulation and interoception as we go along in future episodes. But the thing to keep in mind here is that if we truly want to ensure alignment in our lives, we need to be focused and aware of when those times happen so that we do not fall into distortion or reactivity as part of that process. And we'll go over that a little bit more in future episodes. It also is another way for us to being able to understand what we call resonance and dissonance, which is really the heart and soul of how we try to ensure that we align with our true and chosen identity. And resonance is the way that we do that. When we feel resonance for something, it naturally makes us feel good about it. We naturally feel and understand the way that things directly resonate with us because It is an alignment not just simply through emotional cues or how we feel or what we think about it in terms of positivity, but we feel it directly through a full alignment in our entire system, somatically, emotionally, in narratives, in judgments, in words, and in action. When we are truly aligned with something, we are resonant with it, and we feel that resonance throughout all parts of the actual process of identity alignment. And that's what ensuring identity transformation and evolution occur is when we make decisions that make us feel resonant because we actually embody those decisions based on who we are. And many times, a person that feels resonant in an action will often embody it and describe themselves as part of who they are. The easiest way to think about this is if someone really finds joy and resonance in painting, as an example. Not only are they happy that they are actually painting on a canvas, they actually embody it and describe to other people this is who they are. I am a painter. I am a painter who loves creating landscapes of golf courses, as an example, right? They use the words I am or I want to be as part of resonance because it is a self-fulfilling prophecy of understanding that I am this person and I feel resonant with those actions that I'm doing. They're just a natural concourse of how we understand what it is that we resonate with because for the simple reason of it makes us feel good, right? If we want to do something, it innately makes us feel good. We feel those emotions that signal to us resonance, that signal to us that what we are doing is aligned with who we are and who we want to become. The opposite of this, of course, is called dissonance. And this is where we experience cues that make us feel distortion or make us think confusion or misaligned thoughts that don't really quite resonate with who we are. And we experience this in many different ways. And that can happen through somatic experiences, somatic cues like chest tightening, gut wrenching, things that just seem to feel or are simply off for whatever reason. Emotional cues, in this case, that signal to dissonance, also come from threat responses. Those could sometimes show up in forms of confusion, fear, anger, resentment, indifference, even if we're really not truly aligned with what it is that we actually are doing. And most of those come from what we call shadow or indifferent signals. It's important for us to understand that signals themselves do not have any inherent meaning, only the meaning that we give it. But if we start experiencing those emotions and somatic cues and thoughts that do signal to us that something is off in some way, that's something to pay attention to as we start to understand and try to decipher what is resonant and what is dissonance in terms of the actions of what we do. And the best way for us to do that is to truly understand for ourselves what is aligned, what is our true identity, what is our chosen identity, and how can we make that a process to ensure that we reach what's called the resonant identity, which is the title of this podcast, the ultimate goal of becoming an identity that is full of resonance. So the last thing that we'll go over today is every single podcast, I do challenge everyone to experience a 7-day process of really trying to embody the lessons that we actually bring into the podcast that we have. And so the reason for that is because we don't just simply want to feel aligned in our identity, or we don't want to just simply listen to what it is we're experiencing and maybe feel good about ourselves, if we're going through a podcast, right? I believe in understanding of action because the only way for us to be able to embody things is to really be able to action on them. Because we can say that we're aligned in our identity all day long. That's just simply our own personal life or experience or thought process. Great. But the fact is to actually feel aligned, to be aligned, to actually embody identity alignment, we have to action on that. There's just no way around it. And that's the hardest part for some people to really be able to understand is that in order for us to be able to embody who we are and who we want to become, we have to live it, right? We don't have a choice. Like, I can say all day long that I'm a podcaster. I could do this and simply enjoy life and pretend and just give whatever it means to be able to say, I am a podcaster, a writer, an embodier of embodiment of my own identity, right? But does that mean anything? Words are just words. That's just simply something I could say all day long. But to action on it, which is the ability for us to really be able to fully understand and truly embody who we are, we need actions in order to be able to prove that. And so every single podcast episode at the end, I will give you a challenge that I would like to have you do to ensure that you are not just saying that you're aligned, but embodying identity alignment as part of the resonant identity. And here's what we're going to do for the end of this one. We need to have you identify who you are. We need to have you identify who you were, and we need to have you identify who you are becoming. Your past part of yourself, your current self, and your future self. This is in my first chapter, actually, of the Resonance Core Framework book that will be happening and being launching later this year. But I'm going to go ahead and give you this challenge because it really does come down to the fruition of who you are. And it is the basic building blocks of being able to understand your true identity and what it is that you're trying to become, who you're trying to become, why you're trying to become that person, and how you can do that. So for your 7-day challenge for this podcast, here's what I would like to have you do. You'll need about 20 minutes in order to be able to do each of the three. You'll want to do this in a very quiet room, in a place where you won't experience distractions, and in the best way for you to remain grounded. Now, if you're not familiar with grounding, just know for now that you need to be in a place where you can be alone, you can feel aligned, and you can just simply answer questions without any judgment, moral character, or anything that might skew your answers. So whatever it is that you need to do to feel connected to the location of where you are, who you are, and so on, do whatever makes you feel happy. Go on a hike, walk in the park, simply go into your office and shut the door, put on a candle, whatever makes sense to you and helps you ground yourself so that you're not distracted. No one else can distract you, and you can really give earnest, honest answers to these 3 questions. They will be done in 3 different sessions. If you feel like you want to do them all in one section, you can do that as well. But I recommend doing them separately because it really does help cement the idea of what it is to mean and define your identity. So you're going to answer these 3 simple questions. Who am I? Who have I been? And who am I becoming? Your past self, your present self, and your future self. And I want you to answer as many times, as many things that come to mind to each of those 3 questions. Who have I been? Who am I? And who am I becoming? Your past self, your current self, and your future self. Like I said, I want to ensure that you're being very honest and earnest with yourself. Any answer that you come up with will be perfect for you. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It may have some things that may have distortion, and that is okay. The idea is you want it to come from within you. What your mind thinks you were, who you feel that you were, what somatically makes sense of who you were, and so on. And then move on to the next question. Use a piece of paper. That's usually the best way to do it, is to write it out, because writing tends to bring out a raw data set that helps us make sense of something while not introducing distortion. Typically writing and also typing it out, if you prefer a digital means, I do that as well. That gives you the avenue to being able to make sense of your thoughts and your feelings and your somatic cues in a way that someone else could read that and say, okay, I see what it is you're trying to understand and talk about here. So when you do this exercise for the next 7 days, do so in a way that helps you expand your mind and helps you be able to really come to terms with who you are. The thoughts and the feelings and the actions and all of those things that really do help you define your past, your present, and your future. Because we're going to use these as the building blocks for future episodes, especially as we get further to the resonance core framework, because that is definitely part of the big picture of what's happening here. But if you're really wanting to understand yourself, you really do need to understand these three basic questions. And the only person that can define those things are you, no one else. You may be able to embody it from other people or borrow from some of the things you're part of, like your family, your friends, your religion, your politics, whatever. But those things are not who you are. They're just parts of who you are. Only you can define those things. And it's this exercise that's going to help you do that. And so I really challenge you to take this effect and do this on your own time, where no one can distract you. You could really come to terms with all of those three questions. I really want to thank you for listening to my podcast today. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe, review, and like this on your favorite podcast service. It definitely helps me out a lot to get out the word and have more resonance with the other people who can actually work that through us. You can find the Resonant Identity on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or X under the hashtag the Resonant ID. Try this week's 7-day experiment and share with me how about your result, where you'll subscribe or on social media. You can also email us at theresonanceidentity@fluxline.pro. Try this week's 7-day experiment and please let me know how it goes. Your feedback will definitely shape future episodes. Thanks for listening to my podcast, and I hope this resonated with you and gave you more ways to help you define and live out who you are. Have fun, be safe, and know who you are and what you stand for. And make choices aligned with your true and chosen identity. Stay safe out there. Goodbye now.